Imagine a nation. It's got its own government, its own money, and a track record of peaceful elections. It's a stable democracy in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. The only thing it's missing? A spot on the map. This is the story of Somaliland, and today we're going to break down the one single announcement that just shattered 30 years of the world basically looking the other way.
And there it is. That one sentence. It did what no other UN member state had dared to do for over 3 decades. This announcement sent absolute shockwaves from the Horn of Africa all the way to the halls of the United Nations, forcing everyone to finally confront a question they had ignored for a very, very long time.
So, to really get what just happened, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the recognition itself. Then, we'll dive into Somaliland's pretty unique history and break down the legal case for its existence. After that, we'll see how the world reacted, watch the big showdown at the UN, and finally, we'll ask, what does all this even mean for the future? Okay, let's start with the big moment itself. Israel's move was officially framed as being in the spirit of the Abraham Accords, that framework that's been shaking up diplomacy in the Middle East. But this wasn't just about the Middle East. This was a really bold step right into the incredibly complex politics of the Horn of Africa.
But get this, there's a wild piece of history here. This actually wasn't the first time Israel recognized Somaliland. Nope. Way back in 1960, when Somaliland got its independence from Britain, Israel was one of more than 30 nations that recognized it. Now, that only lasted for 5 days before it voluntarily joined with Somalia. But still, this makes Israel the first country to recognize Somaliland not once, but twice.
Now, to really appreciate why this recognition is so massive, you have to understand the journey of Somaliland itself. For over 3 decades, it's been a de facto state, a nation in every way that matters, but totally invisible in the eyes of international law.
So after that brief taste of independence in 1960, the union with Somalia went south, and it led to a horrific civil war. Then, in 1991, as the Somali state was completely collapsing, Somaliland said, that's it, and restored its sovereignty. Ever since, it's been building all the things a state needs, holding elections, referendums, you name it. It's established this track record of democracy and stability that's just a world away from the chaos that has so often consumed the region.
And if you want proof of their democratic street cred, just look at the 2024 presidential election. The opposition candidate, Abdirahman Iro, won by a landslide. And what did the incumbent president do? He peacefully conceded. This was one of only 5 presidential elections in all of Africa in 2024 where power was transferred peacefully from the ruling party to the opposition. That's a big deal.
So you've got this history of self-governance, you've got democratic stability. What's Somaliland's formal argument for becoming a recognized country? Well, the case they and their supporters make is both legal and practical. They basically argue they've checked all the boxes.
The whole legal argument really hinges on this thing from 1933 called the Montevideo Convention. It's like the classic 4-point checklist for what makes a state a state. And proponents of recognition say Somaliland doesn't just want to meet these criteria, it's been meeting them for decades.
Let's just run through it real quick. A defined territory? They say, yep, the old British Somaliland protectorate borders. A permanent population? Check. A functioning government? As we've seen, they have a president, a parliament, their own currency, their own security forces. And what about the capacity for foreign relations? Well, they've got informal ties with a bunch of countries, and they've even signed major economic deals, like that port agreement with Ethiopia.
And these arguments are definitely getting louder. In the United States, for instance, you've got a growing number of lawmakers who are making the case that recognizing Somaliland isn't just about following the law. It's about strategic interests, about gaining a reliable, democratic partner in a really critical part of the world.
But if the case is so clear to its supporters, why the 30-year wait? Because Israel's decision immediately ripped the curtain back and showed just how deeply divided the world is on this. The reaction was instant, it was explosive, and it created 2 completely different realities.
So in Hargeisa, Somaliland's capital, you had people flooding the streets, celebrating. They saw it as the ultimate validation. But internationally, it was a tidal wave of condemnation. Israel's move was called illegal, a violation of Somalia's sovereignty, and a dangerous precedent. It's like they were talking about 2 different events.
And the opposition was swift and serious. Most importantly, the African Union, which is really committed to upholding old colonial-era borders to stop countries from breaking apart, firmly rejected it. And they were joined by the Arab League, the GCC, and huge regional powers like Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. This left Israel almost completely alone on the world stage for making this decision.
So
This global divide, it all came to a head at an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. And this wasn't just polite diplomatic statements. No, this was direct, face-to-face confrontations over the very meaning of sovereignty and international law. Somalia's ambassador came out swinging, laying out their case in the sharpest terms you can imagine. They argued this wasn't about recognizing reality. It was an act of aggression by an outside power designed specifically to break up their country, a direct assault on their national sovereignty.
Israel's representative fired right back, arguing their decision was the exact opposite of aggressive. They framed it as a principled acknowledgement of a reality that's been on the ground for over 30 years, that Somaliland is a functioning state and meets the legal tests. They said, we're not creating a new reality, we're just recognizing the one that's already there.
Then the United States jumped into the fray, defending Israel's right to make its own diplomatic calls. The U.S. ambassador pointed to other countries recognizing a Palestinian state and basically accused the Council of having double standards. But, and this is a really critical point, she made it clear the U.S. was defending Israel's right to make the decision, not endorsing the decision itself. American policy, she said, had not changed.
But that comparison was immediately shot down. Slovenia's ambassador retorted that the two cases are totally different. Palestine, he said, is illegally occupied territory, while Somaliland is legally part of an existing UN member state, Somalia. So what you're seeing here is this deep, fundamental disagreement over international law playing out at the highest level possible.
So, after all the fireworks at the UN, where does this actually leave Somaliland? Well, the diplomatic battle is just one piece of the puzzle. To really understand what the future holds, we have to look past the headlines and at the complex reality inside Somaliland itself. And this brings us to the central question, right? Even if more countries started to follow Israel's lead, is international recognition really a magic bullet? Would it solve all of Somaliland's problems? The answer, as it turns out, is, well, it's complicated.
See, while Somaliland gets praised for its democracy, its human rights record is a major roadblock, especially for Western nations. The Constitution bans the promotion of any religion except Islam. People have literally been thrown in jail for apostasy, for leaving the faith. On top of that, support for independence isn't even universal inside the country. It's strongest with the dominant Isaaq clan, but other clans are a lot more hesitant.
And this chart just perfectly illustrates the core paradox of the whole situation. Freedom House gives Somaliland a score of 43 out of 100, rating it partly free. Now that definitely highlights some real challenges, but it's a world away from Somalia, which scores a measly 8 and is rated not free. So it's an imperfect democracy for sure, but it's a beacon of relative freedom compared to the country it broke away from.
And this leaves the international community with a really profound dilemma. What's the right path forward here? Should the world reward 3 decades of stability and democratic progress, maybe hoping that recognition will push them towards reform? Or must a state guarantee universal human rights first before it's even allowed to take a seat at the table? There are no easy answers here.